Welcome to DD Durban Online. We're a church family on mission to see Durban change into a place where Jesus reigns. Here's this week's message.
Guys, we're in our series of prayer and we're on week number 4. And if you've been journeying with us, we are actually slowly but surely walking through the Lord's Prayer. This idea and this privilege that we have to speak. The disciples could have asked Jesus anything, and I start every week with this. They could have asked him, teach me how to do some nice party tricks by turning water into wine, or teach me how to walk on water. But they didn't ask him any of those things. They asked him, Lord, teach us how to pray. Teach us how to speak to the King of the universe. That was their heart's desire, and they wanted Jesus to train them. And then Jesus dives in, and I'm just quickly going to read it. And he says to them, this is how. Not this is what, but this is how you should pray. So Jesus is giving us a posture. He's giving us a context. He wants us to go into conversation with God, thinking about this, posturing, positioning ourselves like this. And he goes on and he says, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And that's Jesus' words and guidance for his followers, his disciples. He wants us to, on a daily basis, repetitively speak to God about this. Have this right front and center in our conversations with the King. Now, just a quick little note before I dive into today's specific topic. I just want to remind everyone what's really interesting about this prayer is that there is no I or me in this prayer. So God wants us to not speak about, Father, my Father in heaven. It's our Father in heaven. And it's your name, your kingdom, your will. And then give us, not give me. So there's this idea of being part of a family when we speak to our Father, recognizing that we're not just on our own, we're not alone, we are journeying together. And that's the invitation for all of us. And with that in mind, I would like to dive into today's line. Last week, we spoke about give us this day our daily bread. And today, we're just going to focus on the next little line, where Jesus encourages us to forgive. And he says the following, forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors. And we're just going to spend time today on that idea of forgiveness and the conversation and the prayer of forgiveness when we speak to the Father about forgiveness. I thought it best to tackle it like this. To firstly answer the question, why do I need to forgive someone anyway? Why? What's the reason? What's in it for me? Why do we need to forgive someone that's really wronged us? And then secondly, look at the question of how. So let's dive in firstly. Why do we need to forgive? I believe there are two reasons that we find, and especially in this space. The first one is we need to forgive because God has forgiven us. He has forgiven us. That's quite a big statement. Forgive us. So we first ask, God, forgive me. I embrace your forgiveness. And then we're encouraged to forgive those that have wronged us. And it's kind of like giving us the framework of forgiving like we've been forgiven. That's the picture. So it's first starting with embracing, receiving forgiveness. Now, what's interesting about the statement of forgiveness and what I find powerful for me is the fact that forgiveness here is likened to canceling debt. So it's talking about forgiving us our debts. We are indebted. It's canceling debt for someone. Now it's interesting because there is another version of this prayer. It's in the book of Luke, and the Gospel of Luke. And there it's forgive us our sins, our trespasses, our sins, our wrongs. But here the word sin, specifically in Matthew's Gospel, is focused on debt. This idea of when I've wronged someone, I am in debt to them. So when we talk about debt cancelling, we're talking about, for instance, played a little bit of cricket. And the next moment, I have my clues in the moment, or A.B. de Villiers, or whoever your hero is. They bowl the ball and I go for it, the garden cricket moment. And you're like, yes, Papa. And there we go, 6 and window breaks. Anybody had that one? 6 and out. Anybody play by those rules? Okay, so now you have a problem. You broke someone's window. And who's going to fix it? Mom and dad comes out. Immediately first question is, who broke the window? Confess, own up to it. And the next moment, you're indebted. You need to replace that window. You need to pay the bill to put back a new window. You're in debt. You broke something. That's the picture of debt. You've taken something from someone that's not yours, and now you need to replace it or to pay it back. That's what it means when you're indebted. And Jesus says here, when we pray for forgiveness for our sins, it's like we're indebted. We broke something. Now, this can only work in a world when we ask God, and that's what's interesting to me, it starts off with, forgive us our debts. So we're talking to God, and we're saying to God, God, forgive us what we owe you. Have you ever thought about this? Have you ever thought about the fact that you owe God something? You're indebted. I don't know if you guys have thought about it like that. Sometimes people will even say, but I've never done anything wrong to God. I've never even cursed him. I've never even said anything bad to him. So how does this idea of asking God's forgiveness because I have wronged him in some other way, how does that work? Well, this idea only works in a worldview where we believe that every single human being is the sacred image and likeness of God himself. So every person that you sit next to, every person that you speak to, when you look down upon them, when you curse them, when you don't like them, when you gossip about them, whatever it may be, is the image of God. And if you've wronged a person next to you in some other way, maybe you've scarred them, maybe you've abused them, maybe you have broken them down in some other way, you have done so to the sacred image and the likeness of God. In other words, you've broken down his image. You've scarred it. You've beaten it. You said, I don't want this. In essence, then, it means you've scarred him. It's his image. You've broken him down. You've treated him wrongly. Hence the reason, whenever you hurt someone next to you, you are indebted to God. So it's not just you're indebted to that person. Because that person is the image of God, you owe him. You need to pay back. You need to put back what you've taken, the confidence that you've taken, the innocence that you've taken, the wrong that you've done to the person next to you. So that's the first part of this prayer. It's recognizing that you are living in a world where every person that you are engaging with is the image of God, and that you need to treat them as such, holy, sacred, good, with love. That's the picture. So we get asked to do that. In other words, actually, Paul double clicks on this idea. So that gives us the motivation to actually hold back. The wrong that we've wronged him by scarring his image is far greater than the wrong that that person has done to me when I need to forgive. So Paul talks about this in Romans 12. He says, Beloved, never avenge yourselves. What does he say? Beloved, sometimes when you feel it's your right, when it's been a big wrong, is that what he says? It says, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. In other words, Jesus says it's not our space whenever we have wronged someone to ask back. It's based on this truth that we're all his image, and the wrong that you've done to him is far greater than the wrong anyone could have done to you. So we stand back. It's his space. It's not our space. First reason, God forgave us. So we need to forgive others around us. He's instructing us to forgive the world around us. Second reason is that forgiveness or resentment by itself is self-destructive. It hurts you more than it hurts the person that's wronged you. Do you realize that? When you harvest bitterness and unforgiveness in your heart and you live with resentment, it actually is worse for you than the person that's wronged you. It's like drinking poison and hoping the other guy will die. In fact, interestingly enough, research shows us, and I was like shocked when I did this, just to go and check out what's the impact of unforgiveness on our health. What's the impact that it has on our bodies? To harvest bitterness, to stay within a space, a chronic state of resentment. Interestingly enough, it showed us, research, that it's classified. I found this in one of the articles that I read. What's really interesting, it's now classified in medical books as an actual disease. To be in a state of unforgiveness is a disease. It's linked to, unforgiveness is linked to medical illnesses. It's like either the cause or the catalyst of these, of depression, heart disease, diabetes, even cancer is connected to a state of unforgiveness. There's a guy called Dr. Stephen Stanford. He's the chief surgeon at the Cancer Treatment Centers of America. He says the following. He says, refusing to forgive makes people sick. That's his discovery in his medical profession. Refusing to forgive makes people sick and keeps them that way. In fact, forgiveness has been linked to cancer so profoundly that they've actually started a new form of treatment. It's called forgiveness therapy. Because 61% of the cancer patients that they treat have been linked to unforgiveness. They're dealing with some or other big form of unforgiveness. And their bodies cannot stay in that state of chronic anxiety. Because that's what it means to harvest bitterness and resentment. You're ready to fight, flight. In fact, what happens to your body because you're in that state 24/7 is it stops producing the foot soldiers that helps you fight illness in your own body because you're not relaxing. And they found that when someone forgives from the heart, interestingly enough, in this forgiveness therapy process, they found that people's body could relax, be at peace, and then suddenly start healing themselves. What a powerful moment. Forgiveness, not just a spiritual idea. It seems like it's making its highlights in the medical arena nowadays. I think the most powerful story that I've ever heard about someone being healed after forgiving is the story of an older guy. My parents went to a breakaway weekend, and they were ministering at that weekend specifically. And as part of that weekend, they handled the topic of forgiveness. And someone went to the front and told the whole story, and then people got an opportunity to consider who do they need to forgive. And there were moments where they would sit together and everybody would have a prayer session, and there would be people around them helping people, facilitating a moment of forgiveness for them. So there was this one guy, he rocked up, he's an older guy, about 50 to 60 years of age, and he was deaf in both of his ears. He couldn't hear. And it's happened to him from childhood. So at a certain stage in childhood, his ears just went backwards and he just physically couldn't hear anymore. So they're in this prayer moment and they're giving him an opportunity to forgive. And as they're praying, one of the guys, while praying for this guy to forgive, just experienced so clearly that this oak that needs to forgive, he needs to forgive a guy called John. So the name John came very strongly up in this guy's thoughts and mind, and he thought, like, maybe I'll just taste it. And he said to this oak, and they wrote it down, and he said to them, he actually had hearing aids, sorry. And they said to him in the hearing aids process, when he still had it on, they said to him, I experienced that God says you need to forgive a guy called John. The moment they said it, this guy freaked out. He ripped out his ear headphones, and he didn't want to hear anything further. It's like, no ways, cannot do that, it's impossible, I will never do that, I will never be able to do that. What was really interesting is the guy that was needing to forgive, his name was also John. So John needed to forgive John. And the whole story behind it is after they've encouraged this oak to actually forgive the person that's wronged him, John, the story came out that it was a young boy when he was still at school that teased him and that hurt him verbally in a very bad way. So much so, this guy had such a traumatic experience that he just stopped listening. And from that moment on, his ears started going bad. And then finally, when he gave in, he surrendered. And in that moment, when he forgave John, the moment he forgave John, his ears were opened. A guy that couldn't hear, basically his whole life long, forgave someone, and the next moment, he could hear. His body just clicked back, and his ears was opened. True story. The power of forgiveness can heal more than just emotional wounds, guys. It depends on your journey. But to forgive is truly a powerful thing. It is good to forgive. So firstly, we do it because God forgave us. Secondly, we do it because resentment just simply doesn't work. Forgiveness is the only thing that will heal you, especially when you've been wronged. Okay, so that's why we need to forgive. Now, how do we forgive? If you're in a space where someone's wronged you, which I believe most of us sitting here, if you've not been wronged, you've probably not lived long enough. And guarantee you will be wronged in some other way in your future. Hence, Jesus wants us to prepare our hearts on a daily basis to be ready to forgive people who've wronged us and to stand in a space where we are open to be forgiven. So how do we do this? Well, I thought it best to talk about how we forgive by firstly just looking at what forgiveness is not. Because there are many times misconceptions to this idea of forgiveness. Many times people think forgiveness is condoning another person's behavior. And I just want to say today that forgiveness is not condoning another person's bad behavior. In fact, forgiveness is actually the opposite of that. When you forgive someone, you have to be wronged by that person. So it's not saying it's okay for you to do what you've done and continue doing that. It's actually saying what you've done is not right. It's wrong. You're calling a spade a spade. Forgiveness is the last thing when it comes to condoning. It's far away from condoning someone else's wrong. It's actually calling it out and putting it on the table, front and center. So first thing, forgiveness is not, it's not condoning someone else's bad behavior. Secondly, forgiveness is not all about just saying or speaking to a person physically and telling them that I forgive you. This is so important to recognize now. Many times when you need to forgive people, sometimes the person is not even there. They're dead. That's happened to many people that need to forgive. My dad once won back when I was young, and he's passed away now. You don't need to speak to your dad to forgive him. It's an action that you can do on your own. You don't need to speak to the individual. And sometimes it's not even wise to speak to that individual. So forgiveness does not require us to go and speak to the individual. Not always. Sometimes it might be good if you have that opportunity and the relationship is in such a space. But that's not forgiveness. Thirdly, forgiveness is not reconciling with that person. It doesn't mean because I've forgiven, now we're happy chappy and we're going on again. That doesn't mean that. That's something different. However, forgiveness is the foundation for reconciling. If you would like to reconcile with someone that's wronged you, you won't be able to do it if you haven't forgiven that person. It's super important. That leads us to the fourth thing. Forgiveness is also not trusting that person again. This is super important, guys. Many times, a lot of Christians goes on guilt trips because they believe I need to trust and allow that person back into my life after I've forgiven them. And yes, if there is a possibility to do that, Paul and Jesus encourages us to go as far as it is up to you. As far as you can go, keep the peace. Live in right relationships with one another. Do not hold grudges. Do not live with the resentment in your heart. Okay? That's the urge that God gives us. But comes with a little asterisk. As far as it's up to you. If the other person is not in a space where they're trustworthy, you can't trust them. They're going to wrong you again and again and again. It's not a wise thing to engage again in a relationship. Trust needs to be earned, firstly. And trust needs to be tested. Super important. That's healthy, mature relationships. Even God himself tests whether he can entrust you. We have so many stories of this. As God tests the ones that he wants to entrust with the blessing that comes through their life. So if you want to enjoy the blessing of that relationship that you're walking in, that's broken, we need to taste that trust first before we can enjoy the blessing of that relationship. And it needs to be trustworthy. It needs to be strong. But forgiveness is not about rebuilding trust, even though it is the foundation. It starts there. Cannot do it if we haven't forgiven. Lastly, and this is quite an interesting one for me, and a reminder to all of us, is that forgiveness is not just a once-off thing. It's not like I forgive someone once because they've wronged me long back, and then it's over. That's simply just not how it works. If anyone has ever wronged you before, you will know that you're going to have to forgive that person probably a few times over and over and over again. Whenever you want to bring in some debt there, you've wronged me and I owe you and I'm going to make you feel guilty and I'm going to make you feel bad about this and I'm going to sit here and drink some poison. You're going to have to forgive. You're going to have to walk away from that. And it might happen again. Same moment, back past, memory comes up and you are tempted again to take vengeance. Do you hear what I'm saying? And instead of following into that temptation, you are encouraged to forgive and not to take vengeance, to never do that. So forgiveness is not a once-off thing. If you don't believe me, listen to what Jesus said to Peter. Peter said, I'm next level guy, Jesus. How many times should I forgive someone? 7 times. Should I go that far? Like I'm next level. And Jesus looks at him and he says, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Okay, like Jesus raises the bar. And now I know there's going to be a few spreadsheet logical guys sitting in the room asking me what does 70 times 7 mean? Is it 490? I think if I'm correct. Thank you very much to all the spreadsheet guys giving me a yes. You have it right there. And my answer will be absolutely not. Jesus is not at all speaking about an amount of times. He's talking about creating an environment, a world of a perfect commitment where his people have a perfect commitment to forgiveness. Okay? That's basically what he means when he says 7 times 70, 70 times 7. And let me take you on a journey that you can see. Okay, so I'm going to double click a little bit. Okay, so where do we get to this perfection picture and this creating a world where we are perfectly, wholeheartedly, deeply committed to forgiving the person that's wronged us? Well, in the biblical language, in Jewish and Hebrew literature, numbers play quite a big role. And the number 7 and the number 10, which together would form, if you 7 times 10, get to 70, plays a specific big role in the creation work that God did. God created the world in 7 days, and to do it, he spoke 10 times. Go and read it. 10 times God said, and God said, and God said. In those 7 days, God spoke 10 words. Hence, whenever you see the number 10 or the number 7, you know it speaks of creation. It's a big creation work. And interestingly enough, he creates by speaking. Just think about this for a moment, guys. You are encouraged to speak forgiveness over someone. You're creating a new world when you're doing this. Or else you're going to speak curse and hatred and resentment and bitterness. And you're going to create a new world. Okay? So we get the picture of creation, and then to its fullness. 7 is also the number for completion, because on the 7th day, God said, it is finished, it's rested, it's done. That what I've done here is complete. So he talks about complete forgiveness. 70 times 7 is a figure God uses to speak about complete forgiveness. Don't believe me? There's only one other guy that used this phrase, 70 times 7. And Jesus is actually quoting him. And here's the guy that spoke it just after we saw the great fall in Genesis chapter 3. In Genesis chapter 4, Cain and Abel is born. Cain decides he's jealous and he kills his brother. He runs and he builds a city and he gets children. And his children has children. And they have children. And they have children. 7 generations down. And then we meet the pinnacle of Cain's creation work. Because the Bible only gives us 7 generations. That's the 7 days. And here Cain's vengeance and his jealousy and his anger towards his brother ends up into a space where we see the climax of his creation. What came through Cain? Well, it's Lamech. And I want to read to you what Lamech said about who he is and how phenomenal he is. He's quite a violent guy. He says the following. It's in Genesis chapter 4, verse 23 and 24. He says, Lamech said to his wives, not wife, wives. So he's already going beyond. Adah and Zillah. He says, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech, like accumulating them as of their property. Give heed to my speech. Listen up, ladies. Let me tell you something about Lamech. It's basically what he's doing here. And then he goes on, boasts. For I have killed a man for simply wounding me. And a boy. I've killed a boy. An innocent little boy, just for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 70 times 7. Okay. You guys see? Jesus is quoting this statement. And he's talking about a guy that's creating a world where vengeance increases. You guys see? Interestingly enough, I want you to see there is this imbalance in what Lamech gives. Someone hurt him, wounded him, simple wound, takes their life. It's unfair. Gives them more than what they deserve. In the opposite direction, by the way, as forgiveness goes. And then a little boy strikes him. And he overacts and kills the boy. Do you guys see the growth? Lamech is literally busy creating a world where you're committed to harboring vengeance. And it's growing exponentially. And you give people what they don't deserve, but in the opposite way of what Jesus says. And Jesus then calls his followers to not like Lamech, 70 times 7, create a world filled with vengeance and bitterness and revenge. He calls us to also give people what they do not deserve, but in the opposite direction. And create a reality and a world where his forgiveness is abundant, where debt has been cancelled in abundance. That's the world God is asking us. So how far do you need to forgive someone? Well, until the day you die. To form a part of a world where God is restoring. Because Jesus gave us the cue. And he said, anyone who has harmed, wronged, killed, beaten, scarred my image, my likeness, the crown of my creation, has done so to me. And if you don't believe me, when you got an opportunity to bow down before him, you killed him and nailed him to a cross. He said, I don't want you in my life. I'm killing the image of God. And whenever you do that to another person, and here's the rough one, or to yourself, you're indebted. And Jesus says, I came to cancel that debt. And I'm asking you to do the same. You see, as Christians, guys, forgiveness is not just simply giving something or receiving something. According to Jesus, forgiveness is a reality that we are called to live in as his children. We are called to live in that and cultivate that reality, that this world will become a world of forgiveness, where people's debt and people's wrongs are forgiven. That's the invitation. That's quite a big one. Okay. So now that I've said what forgiveness is not, and we have quite a cool grip on this, what is it? What does it mean? How do I then forgive? How do I do this, Lorraine? If I want to forgive someone that's wronged me, what must I do? And I believe the best way to explain that is to share a little illustration on a question that people many times ask about God's forgiveness. The question goes as follows. The question is, why did Jesus have to die for God to forgive us? Why did Jesus have to allow his son to die on a cross in order to forgive us? Why was that the price? Why couldn't God just open up the heavens, take his deep God voice, I forgive you, and everybody just like, okay, cool, we're square, we're good. Why did Jesus have to die? Well, asking that question means probably you haven't really thought about what happens when you need to forgive. So I want you to imagine someone that's wronged you in a big way. I mean, they have hurt you. They have taken something from you, and you will never, ever be able to get it back. They've wronged you in a very big way. And every single time you look at that person, when you meet them on the street, when you walk past them, and I mean, it's like deep wrong. You are heart sore. Every time you see that person, what happens? That pain, anguish, that wrong triggers in your life, triggers in your heart. And pain makes us do weird things. Ask me, I know. I've seen quite a few of us doing some weird stuff because we're in pain. And then we overreact. And firstly, I'll be honest with you, whenever I see someone or something is triggered like that, the first thing I'm thinking, option one, you hurt me, I hurt you back. Seeing that you can't repay me for what you've taken from me, I will just take that from you. Then I feel better because you also don't have it. Anybody with me in that picture? That's usually the first option. That's the way we try and deal with the pain inside of us. Pain, we're reminded of it, so we immediately give it back. That's the picture of revenge. Forgiveness would mean you walk past that person, you see that person's trigger that moment of pain in your life, and instead of choosing to hurt them back, you in that moment absorb the cost of that pain. And you say, I'm not going to take it from you, and I'm also not going to ask you to pay it back. I'm canceling your debt. You actually do owe me. And if it wasn't for Jesus, I didn't even have to do this. But because Jesus decided to not hold my debt against me and canceled it, today I choose to do the same. And I absorb the pain. And that's the picture that we see with Jesus on the cross. He dies. He absorbs the pain of what we actually did to God. We killed him because we wanted to take his place. We want to be the gods of our own life. That's the picture. We want to go and sit on that throne and say, Jesus, I don't care what you have to say about how I need to do life. This is how I will do life, and you will help me and listen to what I'm telling you to do. Anybody been there before? If you're really honest, I see a few heads. Thank you very much for the honesty. The reality is we're invited to stand back and to not give what we have received. So forgiveness is letting go of calling in debt. You know, there's the story that Jesus talks about. The story of the two servants that owed their master a great piece of debt. And the one owed so much money, he could never ever work it back. He goes before the king. He pleads with the king. He says sorry to the king. And the king says, I've canceled your debt. He walks out, and one of the king's advisors see this guy finding someone else, owing him small little debt, a little bit of money. This guy goes off, and he doesn't repay. What did the master do? He said, take that guy. I will strip him from everything, and he will work his debt back. He didn't live in a world of forgiveness. So today, I want to end off with the motivation for this. And some of you guys that have been journeying with me and have heard this many times before, but I know a few guys are sitting here that hasn't heard it. I'm not going to tell my whole story, but what I do want to tell is I want to share with you guys the power of God's forgiveness towards us by a little illustration that most of you guys have heard before. But it's the illustration of you waking up right next to your wife and you hear something down in the kitchen. And as you walk down the aisle and you meet the guy, there's an 18-year-old boy sitting at your fridge trying to get some food. Now it's New South Africa, so you have your rollie by jou. Hy was onder die kussing. Uitgestap net gaan check wat gaat aan hier. And as you meet that oak, and this oak sees he's in trouble, immediately lifts up his hands and he starts begging for his life. And he starts explaining, saying, I've never had a father. I've lived on the street. Please have mercy on me. And as you see this little boy asking for forgiveness and mercy and so on, and just saying he's hungry, your heart like, okay, not as bad, it's not rough. And just when your heart went like this, you hear a scream, a sound coming from your only son's room. You and your wife, you've been praying for a kid and you couldn't get one. And then God blessed you with a baby boy. And he's 6 months old. And as you look down the aisle, your wife comes walking out with a lifeless little body in her hands. And she's broken. And in that moment, you recognize you stand before a few choices. Because what happened was this oak climbed into your house. Your little baby boy started crying, and he didn't know how to stop him. And fearing for you to wake up, he just took a cushion and put it over the baby's head to silence the sound. And in doing so, he suffocated your only child. So when you stand before that choice, do you see the big wrong? Deeply, you've taken something from me that I will never be able to get back. And you stand before a few choices. First one, revenge. You hurt me, I hurt you. A life for a life. You take your rollie, pull the trigger, and that guy's life's gone. Second option, and for us, for many of us, this would be hard, is you put down the gun and you pick up the phone and you call the police. And you let justice have its way. To simply do that takes great strength for someone to come and pick that person up. That's called justice. Third option is called forgiveness. You look that oak in the eye and you tell him, okay, you've wronged me, but I will not pay back to you what you deserve. I never want to see you again. I forgive you. We don't need to reconcile. I'm not in a place where I'm going to trust you ever. But I don't want to see you in my life. You better run. But I'm not going to take this out on you. You just go. That's forgiveness. Not calling in the debt that he owes in some other way. The last option is the one that Jesus did. That's the one the Father did. And it's called grace. I don't know how any person can get it in their hearts to do this. But that would be you looking at that boy, that 18-year-old man that killed your own son, and tell him, well, you've never had a dad. And I don't have a son. So today, I do not just choose to forgive you, but I would like to adopt you. And I would like to give you everything that my boy would have had in this house. I want to give you his love. I want to give you his opportunity. I want to give you his room. I want to give you his conversations. I want to love you as my own. And that's exactly where we get the motive to forgive. Because Jesus didn't just forgive us. He actually blessed us. While we kill him, he adopts us to become his children.
Thanks for joining us online today. As a family, we would love to meet you in person, so plan a visit to our DD Durban campus by going to doxadeo.org/Durban.